Marcus Wright noticed the bruise on his son's arm right at breakfast, and also the way Ethan, just 11 years old, flinched as he tried to pick up his fork. But what really chilled Marcus's blood was the boy's haste to pull up his sleeve to hide the mark, and the poorly rehearsed lie about having bumped into the classroom desk. Parents sense when something is wrong, and in his son's eyes, Marcus saw more than fear. He saw shame. As the car glided through the streets of Lakewood Heights, returning from Westbridge Academy, a bilingual school where Ethan was one of the few black students, he remembered the words of his wife Sarah, who had passed away 2 years earlier. "Always be a present father, especially when the world pretends not to see." That day, Marcus almost ignored the email inviting his parents to lunch at school, but something inside him wouldn't let him go through with it. He turned around, parked again in front of the iron gate, and went inside. He had no idea that what he was about to witness would expose a web of prejudice and silence so deeply rooted that it would force an entire community, accustomed to hiding its secrets under expensive carpets, to finally confront the truth. Before we continue this story, please comment on which city or country you are watching from. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. This is just the first twist in a story that will surprise you. The morning light filtered softly through the kitchen curtains as Marcus Wright stood at the stove, flipping pancakes with the dexterity of someone who has transformed breakfast into a ritual of self-care. The sound of butter sizzling in the pan filled the air, bringing a familiar warmth to that quiet house, the kind of silence that, in other times, was comfortable. Today, it seemed denser. Marcus glanced over his shoulder. At the table, Ethan, his 11-year-old son, was distractedly fidgeting with his plate, his eyes fixed on the pancakes as if trying to disappear into them. Marcus watched him intently. After losing Sarah, his wife, 3 years earlier, he had learned to decipher the boy's moods even in the subtlest gestures. They had become a silent duo, accomplices in grief, surviving days that seemed too long for two people alone. But something, in recent weeks, had been out of sync, something he couldn't yet name. "The pancakes are almost ready, champ," Marcus said, trying to sound light-hearted as he placed 2 golden pancakes on his plate and walked to the table with a tired smile. "Thank you, Dad," Ethan murmured without looking up. He reached for the syrup with his right arm, and it was in that small movement that Marcus saw it. The grimace. Quick, but unmistakable. His son's face contorted for a second before recovering and forcing a rehearsed neutrality. Marcus sat down slowly. He watched the boy pour the syrup using his left hand, with slow, measured movements. "Is everything all right?" he asked calmly. "Yes, Dad," Ethan replied quickly. Too quickly. That automatic, rehearsed response. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his gaze falling on the boy's right arm. Beneath the blue sleeve of his Westbridge Academy uniform, a dark purple stain stretched down to his wrist. "Ethan, what happened to your arm?" she asked calmly. Ethan immediately pulled down his sleeve, his fingers trembling, avoiding his father's gaze. "It was nothing. I bumped into my desk in the classroom. You know how clumsy I am." The explanation came out smoothly, too rehearsed. Marcus wanted to insist, to demand the truth, but he knew his son. He knew he had inherited from Sarah that silent stubbornness, that impulse to protect others, even when it hurt. He took a deep breath and simply said, "Okay, son. But if something happens, you know you can tell me, right?" Ethan simply nodded, taking a bite of pancake to end the conversation. The rest of the meal continued in silence, the kind of silence that speaks louder than any words. Only the clinking of cutlery and the hum of the refrigerator broke the tension. Minutes later, Marcus was washing the dishes while the boy put his backpack on. The drive to school, normally a time for conversation, seemed deserted that morning. In the passenger seat, Ethan remained stiff, staring out the window with a distant look. "So, how's the art project going? The one with the watercolors?" He tried to start a conversation. "It's going well," the boy replied without emotion. "Any tests today?" "Just the usual." Each answer felt like a wall. Marcus gripped the steering wheel. As they turned onto Oakwood Drive, the grand iron gate of Westbridge Academy loomed in the distance, imposing among ancient trees and pristine lawns. It was a school that exuded status and promise, the kind of place Marcus had always wanted to offer his son, believing he was securing the best possible future for him. But as they drew closer, something changed in Ethan. The boy shrank back, his shoulders slumped, his gaze dimmed. It was as if that gate were a border between two worlds, the world of home and the world of what he feared facing every day. "Son," Marcus began, but didn't have time to continue. Ethan was already unbuckled his seatbelt, eager to get out of the car. Marcus stood there, watching the students walk by with expensive backpacks, laughing, talking loudly, oblivious to the weight his son was carrying. And, in that instant, he understood. Something terrible was happening there, and no one was seeing it. When Ethan got out of the car, several children turned their eyes in his direction. Some smiled slightly, others exchanged knowing glances, and some simply stared at him with an expression difficult to define, something between pity and discomfort. Marcus's chest tightened. He almost opened the door to accompany his son to the entrance, as he used to do when he was younger, but Ethan was already walking away, head down, trying to disappear among the identical uniforms of Westbridge Academy. It was then that something disrupted the rhythm of that morning. A girl with curly brown hair came running toward Ethan, her face flushed, her eyes wide with urgency. Marcus vaguely recognized her from school events. Sophie Martinez, he remembered. She caught up with the boy a few feet before the main staircase and whispered breathlessly, gripping the sleeve of his shirt, "Ethan, please, don't go to lunch today, promise." He looked at her confused. "What? Why?" Before Sophie could answer, a sharp voice echoed through the courtyard. "Miss Martinez, what do you think you're doing? Go to the classroom now." The voice came from a tall woman in a navy blue blazer, her steps firm as she crossed the courtyard, the dry sound of her heels against the asphalt. Marcus recognized her immediately. Professor Victoria Ashford, the vice principal. He had met her once before, during parent-teacher orientation, and the memory wasn't good. There was something in her gaze, a kind of calculated coldness, a judgment that was too quick. Sophie flinched, frightened. She let go of Ethan's uniform sleeve and stepped back, giving him one last worried look before disappearing among the other students. The vice principal stopped in front of the boy, her face tense and her voice dry. "I expect you to behave today, Ethan. I've had enough trouble with you already." The tone was sharp, almost hostile. No trace of concern, no attempt to offer support, only impatience. Marcus instinctively stepped forward, but Ashford had already turned and was walking back towards the building, not even acknowledging his father's presence, as if he were invisible. Ethan stood still, his face pale, his gaze lost. Marcus approached and placed his hand on his shoulder. "Is everything all right, son?" The boy nodded quickly. "I'm fine, Dad. Go to work. I'll see you later." Before Marcus could answer, he had already blended into the crowd, disappearing among the students who were passing through the gate. Marcus stood there, motionless, his heart heavy. Everything that morning had gone wrong. The bruise, his son's frightened look, Sophie's desperate warning, the vice principal's coldness. He returned to the car in silence, his steps slow, his thoughts in turmoil. He sat behind the wheel, but didn't start the engine. He sat there, staring blankly, going over everything that had happened. The tone of Ms. Ashford's voice, the fear in Ethan's eyes, The coincidence of so many signs. Something very wrong was happening inside that school, and he still didn't know what it was. When his phone vibrated, Marcus picked it up automatically. A new email from Westbridge Academy. Dear families, we would like to remind you that parents are always welcome to visit the campus during lunchtime. We believe in maintaining a transparent and welcoming environment where families can connect with their children's daily lives. Marcus frowned. He'd received messages like this before, standard reminders, PR texts that sounded more like formalities than invitations, but the timing of this email seemed too convenient. He put his phone aside and rested his head against the back of the seat. The sun shone softly on the windshield, and for a moment, Sarah's face came to mind. She had been sitting with him on the porch years ago, while Ethan played in the yard. He remembered her words, spoken with a seriousness that now sounded like a warning. Marcus, promise me one thing. If one day you feel that our son needs you, don't wait. Don't hesitate. Be a present father, especially when the world pretends that nothing is wrong. He had promised, and he had kept his promise through every fever, every sleepless night, every school presentation. But at that moment, he understood that this promise meant something much bigger. This wasn't just about attending a parents' meeting, it was about instinct, about listening to that silent alarm that sounds inside those who love, the one that warns, even without proof that danger is near. Marcus took a deep breath, straightened his posture and looked at his watch. There was still time before lunch, and without hesitation he started the car again. This time, not to go to work, but to go back to school. Lunch was in 2 hours. Marcus Wright knew he had an important meeting, spreadsheets waiting for him at the financial consulting firm where he worked, but for the first time in a long time, none of that mattered. He picked up his cell phone and sent a quick message to his assistant. I need to take care of something personal. I'll be unavailable until noon. Then he hung up the phone, turned the car around, and went back to Westbridge Academy. He didn't have a plan. He didn't know exactly what he was looking for, but something inside him screamed that today was not a day to be away from his son. He arrived shortly before noon. The parking lot was quite full, with some parents chatting beside imported cars and employees directing the flow of vehicles. Marcus parked further back, in a shaded spot, away from the hustle and bustle. He stayed in the car for a moment, trying to compose himself. His cell phone vibrated incessantly with work notifications, emails, deadlines, messages. He ignored them all. What really mattered was in there, behind those high walls. The school's facade looked different under the bright sun, less imposing, colder. He walked through the entrance with firm steps, feeling his heart race. The receptionist looked up from her computer screen as he entered. "Can I help you?" he asked in a rehearsed voice. "I'm here for a lunch visit," he replied, trying to sound calm. "Marcus Wright, father of Ethan Wright, 6th grader." She nodded, barely lifting her eyes. "Please sign here. The cafeteria is at the end of the main hallway. Turn left at the trophy display case." Marcus signed the clipboard, pinned his visitor badge to his shirt, and left. The sound of his footsteps echoed on the gleaming floor, mingling with the distant noise of voices and laughter. As he approached the cafeteria, the noise grew louder. The scraping of chairs, clinking trays, laughter, and hurried conversations. He stopped at the door. The cafeteria was enormous, with long rows of metal tables and dozens of students. The cheerful chaos typical of any school. But amidst that movement, something broke the rhythm. In the farthest corner, Ethan was alone, seated at a table for 8. The boy distractedly fiddled with his food, not really eating. His shoulders slumped, his eyes fixed on his tray. No classmates nearby, no friendly glances. It was as if an invisible line separated him from the others. Marcus's chest tightened. He took a step forward, and then stopped. Near the center of the hall, arms crossed, Professor Victoria Ashford conversed with a tall, elegant man in a dark suit. His face was familiar, though Marcus couldn't place it from. Then he recognized him. Dr. Richard Thornton, father of one of the students in the class, a well-known and influential businessman in the city. Both observed Ethan with hard, almost calculated expressions, irritation, expectation, as if they expected something to happen, and it happened. A blond boy with an arrogant expression, Blake Thornton, Richard's son, walked past Ethan's table with a lunch tray in his hands. When he reached his side, he gave him a subtle nudge with his elbow. Ethan's tray slid, his glass of milk tipped over, his sandwich fell to the floor. The dry thud echoed through the room, drawing stares. Ethan looked around, surprised, his face flushing. Before he could react, Blake turned dramatically and shouted, "Professor Ashford, he threw food at me." Silence fell immediately. The entire cafeteria stopped. All eyes turned to Ethan, who remained motionless, his hand still away from the tray, unable to comprehend what was happening. The vice principal's face changed. Irritation turned to fury. She crossed the hall with quick steps, her heels echoing with authority. "Ethan Wright!" she shouted, her voice cutting through the air. "How dare you! I warned you this morning. I said I wouldn't tolerate any more trouble." Ethan recoiled in his chair, terrified. "I didn't do anything," he stammered, his voice trembling. "Don't lie to me," Ashford snapped, approaching him like a storm. Finger pointed, face red with anger. "You're a constant nuisance, a problem that keeps coming back." On the other side of the room, Marcus was already moving. His body reacted even before he could think. He pushed chairs aside, dodged the students, his eyes fixed on his son. His blood pounded in his ears. The scene seemed like a nightmare come true, and he knew with absolute certainty that this would be the moment when everything would change. And then, in an instant that seemed to happen in slow motion, Professor Victoria Ashford raised her hand, not to gesture, not to point, but to strike. The open palm was aimed directly at Ethan's face. The boy recoiled, instinctively raising his arms, his eyes closed, his body tense, anticipating the impact. But the coup never happened. "Don't you dare touch my son." Marcus Wright's voice cut through the air like a blade, sharp, unquestionable. The entire cafeteria fell silent. Their heads turned in unison. The vice principal froze, her hands still suspended, her eyes wide. Marcus strode across the hall, his gaze fixed on her, a mixture of contained fury and authority that made even the teachers instinctively back away. His voice came out calm, but there was a tone in it that made shouting unnecessary, the kind of voice that carries real power. "Move one more inch closer to him, and I'll call the police right now." The silence was absolute. Some students covered their mouths in astonishment. Others simply watched, petrified. Even Dr. Richard Thornton, the businessman in the expensive suit, stood motionless, his face rigid, trying to maintain his composure. Ashford slowly lowered his hand. The anger on his face gave way to panic. "Mr. Wright, this is a school matter." "That's aggression," Marcus interrupted, his voice as sharp as steel. "And you're going to stay away from my son, now." She took a step back, her pride battling fear. She tried to compose herself, smoothing her blazer, attempting to regain control. "Your son has been a recurring problem, Mr. Wright. I am responsible for maintaining discipline, and he forced me to act this way." Marcus did not respond. She knelt beside Ethan, who was trembling, tears streaming down his face, his whole body shaking with shame and fear. "Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause trouble," the boy whispered. Marcus placed his hands on his shoulders and looked at him firmly with tenderness and strength. "Son, look at me. You have nothing to apologize for, understand? Nothing." Ethan nodded, trying to stifle his sobs. His father's words anchored him amidst the chaos. Marcus stood up slowly, and when he looked back at Ashford, something had changed in his face. It was no longer just indignation. It was pure determination. My son did nothing wrong, and you know that. The woman opened her mouth to reply, but she didn't have time. A soft, trembling voice came from across the room. He didn't do anything. Everyone turned around. It was Sophie Martinez, Ethan's classmate, pale but composed, her hands clenched at her sides, her gaze determined despite the evident fear. They've been picking on him for weeks. I saw it. Everyone saw it, and she knew it. She pointed directly at the vice principal. She knew and did nothing. A murmur spread through the cafeteria. The students exchanged glances. Some lowered their eyes, embarrassed. Others nodded silently, relieved that someone had finally spoken. That's true. I saw it too. They did this every day. You never did anything. Voices began to multiply, the sound of dozens of truths stuck in their throats for weeks finally being released all at once. The dam broke. Victoria Ashford paled. Her gaze wavered between fear and disbelief. Doctor Richard Thornton stepped forward, his voice heavy with arrogance. Wait a minute, my son would never do that. Marcus turned slowly to face him, his gaze cold and direct. Your son is an abuser, and you are an accomplice. The man turned pale. The entire cafeteria fell silent again. That's when the doors suddenly opened. Director Robert Morrison rushed in, his face flushed, sweating beneath his tie. What's going on here? He asked, without authority, without strength. Marcus's gaze did not waver. What happened, Principal, is that your vice principal tried to assault my son in front of everyone. And from what I'm hearing, this isn't new. It's a pattern of abuse and silence. The director blinked, confused, trying to understand. Mr. Wright, perhaps we should discuss this in my office. There's nothing to discuss behind closed doors, Marcus interrupted, his voice firm and public. The humiliation was in front of everyone. The truth will be too. Silence returned, tense and heavy. The teachers, previously motionless, now seemed restless. Some students were discreetly recording with their cell phones. Ashford tried to maintain his composure, but the mask was crumbling. Director Morrison looked around, visibly lost, while Dr. Thornton tried once again to intervene. This is all a misunderstanding, Director. My son was just defending himself. But Marcus silenced him with a simple look. And at that moment, in front of the entire school, it became clear who truly held the authority there. Not the leadership, nor the powerful names, but the father decided not to remain silent. Marcus Wright kept his gaze fixed on Director Robert Morrison, the man who should have been protecting children like Ethan, but who, at that moment, was hiding behind his own cowardice. The silence was deafening. And then, discreetly, a young teacher approached. Marcus remembered seeing her at school events, but they had never exchanged a word. She looked around nervously, as if afraid of being watched. He leaned in and whispered, almost without moving his lips, "Check the disciplinary files. Some dates have been changed." Marcus's eyes narrowed. The teacher stepped back, giving him a slight nod before disappearing again among the other teachers. Director Morrison was trying to regain control of the situation, stammering, "Mr. Wright, I assure you that we take all accusations very seriously." "Then I want to see the cafeteria camera footage." "Now," Marcus interrupted, his voice as firm as steel. The principal's face went pale. He looked at Professor Ashford, who remained motionless, her jaw clenched. "I'm not sure if we can access that immediately. There are protocols." "Then follow them," Marcus replied, crossing his arms. "But I'm not leaving here until I see those images." Ashford stepped forward, his voice laden with false authority. "There's no need for that, Director. I've already registered the incident. It's all documented." Marcus turned slowly to her, his eyes fixed, his voice sharp. "So you won't have any problem confirming whether your report is true, will you?" The air seemed to vibrate. The students were motionless. The teachers were whispering amongst themselves. The parents who were there for lunch watched, confused, trying to understand what they were witnessing. And that's when three students approached timidly. They looked at Ethan, then at Marcus, and one of the girls, wearing glasses, with a determined face, murmured, "We have videos." The murmur spread through the hall like a wave. Ashford empalideceu. Morrison swallowed hard. Dr. Thornton, who had previously maintained his arrogant demeanor, now widened his eyes. Marcus turned to the students, his heart racing. "Videos?" The girl nodded. "We recorded it with our cell phones. Over the last few days. It has everything." The cafeteria turned into a silent courtroom. The students were whispering. The parents exchanged worried glances. The employees were paralyzed. The truth hung in the air, ready to explode. Director Morrison seemed to be watching his own career crumble in real time. His face turned pale, his hands trembling slightly. "Guys, please, let's all take a breath and talk in my office. This isn't the right environment for—" "Yes, it is," Marcus interrupted, putting his arm around Ethan's shoulders. "My son was publicly humiliated. The truth will also be told publicly." Ashford's composure was slowly crumbling. His authoritarian tone was now trembling. "Mr. Wright, you're being irrational. These children are confused. I was just trying to discipline a difficult student. This girl is lying." Before anyone could respond, Sophie Martinez stepped forward. Her voice sounded clear, courageous. "I'm not lying." Her mother, Mrs. Martinez, made her way between her parents, approaching with tears in her eyes. "Sophie, what's going on, honey?" The girl took a deep breath and spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Mom, Ethan didn't do anything, he never does, but every day someone provokes him, someone attacks him, someone laughs, and Miss Ashford pretends not to see." A dark-haired boy stood up from the other side of the hall. "That's right, teacher, I saw it." She knew. Then another student. "She always defends the same people. We're afraid to speak." She made it seem like Ethan was the problem. The cafeteria filled with voices, each one braver than the last. The lie was crumbling before everyone's eyes. Ashford tried to react, his voice choked with emotion. "That's absurd. I treat all students with the same respect." Marcus took a step forward, his gaze hard. "Then explain the videos." The girl with glasses, Hannah Foster, walked up to him, her cell phone trembling in her hands. Madison and Emily, her friends, stood silently beside her. "They're all here," Hannah said, her voice firm despite her fear. "Everything that happened every single day. What they did to Ethan, what the school pretended not to see." The cafeteria fell into complete silence. The sound that followed was the click of a video playing. And when the first images started appearing on the cell phone screen, no one could pretend they didn't know anymore. Director Robert Morrison tried to intervene, but it was too late. Several parents had already formed a circle around the students, and the expressions on their faces said it all. They wanted to see the contents of the cell phones. "This happened last Tuesday," said Hannah Foster, the girl with glasses, her voice trembling but determined. She held up her phone, and the parents closest to her leaned over to watch. The video was shaky, secretly filmed in the cafeteria. It showed Ethan Wright sitting alone, eating silently, when Blake Thornton, the son of businessman Dr. Richard Thornton, approached with two colleagues. They surrounded the table and began taunting loudly enough for the microphone to pick up every word. "Nobody wants you here. Why don't you go back to where you came from? This school is for those who deserve to be here." Ethan kept his head down, trying to ignore it, but one of the boys deliberately pushed his water bottle, which fell to the ground, spilling its contents. Ethan bent down to pick it up, and it was at that moment that teacher Victoria Ashford appeared. "What's going on here? Causing trouble again, Ethan?" The boy tried to explain, confused. "They knocked over my food." "Enough with the excuses. Clean this up now and stop disrupting other people's lunch." In the video, the boys laughed quietly as they walked away, while Ashford simply watched them and then turned his back, leaving Ethan alone with the mess. When the video ended, there was absolute silence. Some parents shook their heads in disbelief. Director Morrison's face paled. Ashford tried to articulate something, but the words stumbled. This video doesn't show the full context. There were other incidents. Another student stepped forward, holding his cell phone. We have more. And so, one by one, the students began to show their videos. Monday, Thursday, the previous week. Each recording was worse than the last. Ethan being pushed down the hallway while a teacher watched without reacting. Ethan being ridiculed in class during a group project, with Ashford in the background pretending not to hear. Ethan trying to protect his painting in the art project, and the businessman's son tearing it up, while the vice principal punishes him for causing a disturbance. In every scene, the pattern was the same. The school ignored, silenced, and blamed the victim. Marcus Wright's chest felt like it was going to explode. Each image was like a stab wound. The son had been suffering for weeks, perhaps months, and he had no idea. Ethan protected him, trying to handle things alone so as not to worry him. Guilt took shape in her body like a physical blow. It was then that Dr. Richard Thornton stepped forward, his face red with indignation. This is absurd. These videos are out of context. They're just boys playing around. My son is not an aggressor. Marcus turned slowly, his voice low and firm, each word heavy as a hammer. Your son called mine a charity case. He told him to go back to where he came from. Oh, that's no joke. That's racism. That's humiliation. The businessman turned purple. How dare you? My family donated thousands to this school. Then use that money to teach your son to be a decent human being, Marcus retorted, his eyes flashing. Because status doesn't buy character. The crowd reacted. Parents filmed the scene. Teachers whispered, and chaos spread like wildfire. Director Morrison realized the danger of the image and tried to regain control, visibly sweating. Please, everyone, let's calm down. Mr. Wright, Professor Ashford, Dr. Thornton, can we talk in my office? No, interrupted a chorus of voices. Parents, students, even teachers. One mother stepped forward, Mrs. Martinez, Sophie's mother. Her face was firm, indignant. My daughter told me about the problems with certain students. I didn't want to believe her. I thought she was exaggerating. Now I see that you all knew. Another father intervened. How long has this been going on? How many children have been treated this way? Morrison raised his hands, powerless. The school takes bullying very seriously. We have protocols. Then why weren't they followed? Marcus interrupted, his voice echoing throughout the hall. Why did all the accounts end with my son being found guilty? Why did he need videos for anyone to believe him? The director did not respond. The silence that followed was deafening. But at that moment, everyone present knew. The truth had been exposed. Marcus Wright fixed his gaze on director Robert Morrison, the man who should have protected children like his own son, but who now seemed like just a cornered spectator of his own failure. Nearby, Professor Jennifer Hayes, the same one who had earlier warned Marcus about the altered files, took a hesitant step forward. Her voice was low, but firm enough to cut through the silence of the cafeteria. Director Morrison, I think you need to know that some of us have tried to report irregularities in disciplinary records. She swallowed hard, looking around. We were instructed not to worry about it. The director turned his face away abruptly, his expression tense. I never said that. Yes, she said so, Jennifer insisted, gaining courage with each word. You asked us to trust Professor Ashford and not question her methods. A murmur echoed through the room. The net was closing in. Marcus watched everything unfold. The fear etched on the director's face, the guilt, the slow unraveling of a system that preferred pleasing donors and wealthy families instead of protecting a child. Mrs. Martinez, Sophie's mother, raised her voice. hugging her daughter tightly. "My daughter told me this morning that she was afraid to sit with Ethan at lunch. She said a teacher warned her and other students that it was better to leave him alone. What kind of school teaches children to exclude a child?" The cafeteria filled with murmurs. Students nodded, some cried. Parents looked around, horrified by what they heard. Professor Ashford exploded, unable to maintain appearances. "This is absurd. I've worked here for over 20 years. I have an impeccable record. I'm not going to accept being judged by a group of students who don't understand what it means to maintain discipline." Marcus replied coldly. "So let's look at the official footage. The cafeteria has cameras. Let's watch what happened today." Director Morrison's face lost what little color it had left. I don't know if we can access those recordings without authorization." Before anyone could react, a female voice echoed from the entrance. "It's authorized." Everyone turned around. A woman in a dark suit walked across the cafeteria with firm steps. Marcus didn't recognize her, but Director Morrison instantly turned pale. "Counselor Patricia Crawford," she announced. "I'm here for a routine inspection, and I've just witnessed enough to demand complete transparency. Principal Morrison, access the footage immediately. The Board of Education will want every detail." The director looked like he was about to faint. He grabbed his cell phone with trembling hands and called the security team. While they waited, the air seemed to vibrate. Parents, teachers, and students were aware that something historic was happening there. Marcus knelt beside Ethan, who remained silent, overwhelmed by the attention and the exposed pain. "Hey, son, are you okay?" she asked, her voice soft. Ethan shook his head, his eyes red. "Dad, I didn't want you to know. I thought I could handle it. If I stayed quiet, maybe they would stop." Marcus's heart was broken. He hugged him tightly. "You didn't do anything wrong. Did you hear? Nothing. It's not your fault. It's their responsibility." Ethan sobbed against his father's shoulder. "I just wanted to have friends." Marcus looked him in the eyes, with tears holding back. "You deserve friends. You deserve respect, and I'm going to make sure that happens." The security guard arrived with a laptop and placed it on one of the tables. Principal Morrison, Counselor Patricia Crawford, Marcus Ashford, and some parents gathered around. The video was opened. The timestamp showed the date and time of the incident. The images began. They showed Blake Thornton walking past Ethan's table and knocking over the tray. They showed him turning around to accuse him, shouting. They showed Professor Ashford storming across the hall in a rage, raising her hand, and then, in the next instant, Marcus appeared and blocked the blow. The entire cafeteria held its breath. The video left no room for doubt. There was no context, no excuse, no justification. That's what it seemed to be. An adult woman in a position of power, about to assault an innocent child, and a father who arrived in time to stop her. Counselor Patricia Crawford's face remained impassive. She turned to Ashford, who was trembling. "Do you have something to say, ma'am?" Ashford opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His confidence completely dissolved. Director Morrison sat heavily in a chair, his hands covering his face. "I didn't know," he murmured. "I didn't know it was so serious." Marcus stared at him with deadly calm. "No, Director. You didn't want to know, and there's a big difference." Patricia Crawford straightened her shoulders and spoke authoritatively. "This meeting is adjourned. Director Morrison, Professor Ashford, in my office now." She turned to the others. "The rest of you, please vacate the cafeteria. The council will deal with this immediately." Nobody moved for a few seconds, but everyone knew that morning marked the end of impunity within Westbridge Academy. Classes are suspended for the rest of the day. Parents, please pick up your children. Voices mingled in murmurs as the cafeteria began to empty. Some parents shook their heads, Others whispered indignantly. The tension still hung in the air, thick and heavy. Marcus Wright picked up Ethan's backpack and coat, who remained silent. As he turned to leave, Dr. Richard Thornton approached, visibly disconcerted, perhaps trying to rehearse an apology, but Marcus raised his hand firmly. "Stay away from my son, and keep yours away from him too." The businessman opened his mouth, but Marcus's gaze silenced him. He recoiled, his pride vanished, and left hurriedly accompanied by his son. As father and son walked toward the exit, some students approached. One apologized. The other simply touched Ethan's shoulder and nodded in support. Sophie Martinez hugged him briefly and whispered something that made the boy's eyes well up with tears again. They were almost at the door when Hannah Foster, the student from the videos, ran up to them, breathless. "Mr. Wright, wait, there's something you need to know." Marcus turned around, alert. "What is it, Hannah?" "The disciplinary files," she said, looking around nervously. "I overheard Professor Ashford talking on the phone last week. She mentioned going back to the dates of some incidents to create a pattern against Ethan. I didn't understand it at the time, but now it makes sense." Marcus's eyes narrowed. Who was she talking to? "I don't know, but she seemed worried, like she wanted to erase something before they found out." Marcus stored the information in his mind. He knew with cold clarity that this was not yet over. Outside, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot. Father and son stayed inside the car for a while without speaking. Inside the building, it was possible to see more parents arriving, alerted by phone calls and messages. The news spread quickly. Ethan stared out the window, exhausted. Marcus touched her shoulder affectionately. "We can go home, son. We don't need to stay." Before he could answer, someone knocked on the window. It was Mrs. Martinez, Sophie's mother, with the firm gaze. Marcus lowered the window. "You can call me Diana," she said. "Mr. Wright, some parents and I are staying. We want answers, and we want you with us." Marcus hesitated, but Ethan, in a low voice, said, "Dad, I want to stay. I want to see it through to the end." There was fear in his face, yes, but also courage. He was tired of being silenced, tired of hiding. Marcus nodded. "Okay, we'll stay." When they returned to the building, the cafeteria had been transformed into an impromptu assembly. Parents, teachers, staff, and students filled the space. Director Morrison was pale, huddled next to advisor Patricia Crawford, who was now talking to other members of the board who had been hastily summoned. Marcus and Ethan sat in the center. Sophie and her mother soon joined them. Gradually, other families whom Marcus knew by sight also approached, creating an unexpected sense of solidarity. Councillor Crawford took the floor. "I thank everyone for their patience during this difficult time. The school board takes these allegations with the utmost seriousness. We have already begun a thorough review of the events and a formal investigation into what happened." From the back of the room, a voice rose. "And what about the videos, the evidence that everyone saw?" Patricia Crawford nodded. "The videos are currently being analyzed. They were part of the initial evidence gathering." That's when Diana Martinez stood up. "With all due respect, Counselor, we don't need an investigation to know what happened. We have recordings, witnesses, and a vice principal who tried to assault a child in front of everyone. What more is needed?" The cafeteria erupted in murmurs of agreement. Before Crawford could answer, a student raised his cell phone. "Can I show you something, please?" She hesitated for a moment and nodded. The boy connected the device to the school projector. The lights dimmed and the screen lit up. The images started rolling. It was a recording made a few days earlier. It showed Ethan walking down the hallway surrounded by Blake Thornton and two colleagues. They pushed him against the lockers, laughing. Ethan tried to pass, but the boys blocked his path, taunting him like predators surrounding their prey. The laughter echoed in the room, a recorded, cruel and familiar laugh, and then the sound died. No one else moved. Parents, teachers, and staff watched without blinking, and Marcus, standing beside his son, knew that this display was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning of justice. The audio in the video was clear enough to pick up every word, and every bit of poison hidden between the lines. "What's the problem? Don't you have money to buy real clothes? I bet your father can barely afford to pay for that school. You don't belong at Westbridge." Ethan Wright kept his head down, trying to get away, but the shoving continued. Then on the screen, Professor Victoria Ashford appeared, walking down the hallway. The boys quickly dispersed, feigning innocence. Ashford looked at the boy, his books scattered on the floor, his face humiliated. "Take your things and go to another room," he said coldly, without asking what had happened, without even looking twice. And he walked past him as if Ethan were invisible. The video ended. The silence in the assembly was replaced by an indignant murmur. Parents stood up, some shaking their heads, others arguing in hushed voices. Another student approached. "I have a video from last week." Another one, and another, and another. Each recording showed the same devastating pattern. Ethan is isolated, ridiculed, blamed, and ignored. Ashford was present at all of them. In none of them did she intervene. Sometimes worse, she would punish him. But the most disturbing video came from a shy student whom Marcus didn't recognize. She approached the projector, her hands trembling. "This one was recorded in the office. I was waiting to speak with the principal about my letters of recommendation, and the door was ajar. I heard voices. I started recording because something sounded wrong. The image was almost static, showing only a sliver of the room, but the audio was crystal clear. Voice of Professor Ashford. Student Ethan Wright is becoming a problem. Parents are starting to ask questions. Male voice, unknown. Then deal with it. You've handled worse situations before. Ashford. This one is different. His father is insisting. I think we need to build a stronger case for a possible expulsion. Male voice. Then build it. Document everything, every problem, every disrespectful act. Make it seem like it doesn't fit into the school culture. Ashford. What if there aren't enough incidents? Male voice, in a cold tone. Then create opportunities for them to happen. You know how to do that, Victoria. When the video ended, the cafeteria exploded. Parents screaming, teachers in shock, students exchanging astonished glances. Councillor Patricia Crawford maintained her composure, but her face betrayed anger and disbelief. Someone in the audience shouted, "That voice belongs to Dr. Richard Thornton." Other parents immediately confirmed this. Marcus stood up, his voice calm, yet sharp as a blade. "You weren't just ignoring the problem, you were creating it. You were trying to expel my son from that school." Director Morrison turned pale. "I swear, I didn't know any of this." Marcus interrupted him. "Yes, I knew. I received reports. I saw his name repeatedly. Teachers tried to warn you, and you chose not to see." The director did not respond. His silence was a confession. Patricia Crawford stood up, her tone of voice authoritative and professional. "This meeting is temporarily suspended. The council will now meet to deliberate. Please remain in place." As the council members withdrew, the atmosphere became tense with nervous conversations. Parents approached Marcus, expressing support and shame for not having noticed sooner. Some apologized, others made promises of change. Sophie Martinez was holding her friend's hand. "Mrs. Martinez looked at Marcus and said softly, "You are not alone. What they did to your son will not go unpunished." Marcus hugged Ethan, who was still trembling. "I'm proud of you, son." "I didn't feel strong, Dad. I was scared the whole time." Marcus tightened his embrace. "To be afraid and still face it, that's courage, Ethan. That's what makes you strong." 20 minutes later, the council returned. Councillor Crawford had a serious expression. After reviewing the evidence and consulting with the superintendent of the educational network, the council made the following decisions. The entire room fell silent. Not even a breath could be heard. Effective immediately, Professor Victoria Ashford is suspended without pay pending the conclusion of the investigation into misconduct, falsification of documents, and endangering a minor. A murmur of relief swept through the hall. But Marcus knew that victory wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of the process of making amends. If the investigation confirms what we saw today, the dismissal process will begin immediately, announced Council Member Patricia Crawford, her firm voice echoing in the cafeteria, and the case will be referred to the appropriate authorities. A murmur of approval echoed through the room. Director Robert Morrison will be administratively suspended until the board determines whether his conduct and supervision were appropriate. Morrison lowered his head, his expression dejected. He knew the outcome was inevitable. Businessman Richard Thornton has been officially removed from the school board, effective immediately. A chorus of quiet applause rose from among the parents. And your son, Blake Thornton's enrollment is under disciplinary review. Patricia continued with the clarity of someone who knew the weight of each word. All of Ethan Wright's disciplinary records are being erased and re-evaluated by an independent team. In addition, a parallel investigation will be conducted to determine if other students have been subjected to similar discrimination. She paused and looked directly at Marcus and Ethan, father and son standing side by side. On behalf of Westbridge Academy, I apologize to the Wright family. What happened to Ethan should never have happened to any child in our care. We failed him, and we take full responsibility. Marcus took a deep breath before replying, his voice firm but calm. Thank you for the apology, Counselor. But what my son and so many other children need is not just words, they need assurances. How will you ensure that this never happens again? Patricia nodded, as if she had already expected the question. The council will implement permanent measures, mandatory training on bias and diversity for all employees, creation of an independent student ombudsman position with direct access to families, transparent system for anonymous reporting of bullying and harassment, quarterly reviews of disciplinary data overseen by external experts, parent oversight committee to ensure transparency and accountability. Marcus crossed his arms. And what about the students who assaulted my son? Will they face the consequences? Yes, Patricia replied without hesitation. Their guardians will be notified. There will be disciplinary measures, as well as mandatory psychological support and guidance. It wasn't a perfect solution, Marcus knew that, but it was the beginning, a real first step toward change. Across the room, Diana Martinez stood up, raising her voice. I want to participate in this parents' committee. My daughter was brave today, and I want to honor that by ensuring that this school practices what it preaches. Other parents accompanied her, offering support and volunteering for the new supervisory group. The previously tense atmosphere was beginning to transform into something rare at that school, solidarity. As the assembly drew to a close, students began to approach Ethan. Some apologized for not having done anything sooner. One of them, from the math class, approached with an embarrassed look. Ethan, I'm sorry for staying quiet. I saw everything. I just didn't want them to start chasing me too. It was cowardly. Ethan was silent for a moment, then nodded. Thank you for saying that. The boy gave a small smile. Maybe we can have lunch together tomorrow, if you'd like. For the first time that day, Ethan smiled. I would like. Other students joined him, and Sophie Martinez remained nearby, loyal and proud. The isolation that had surrounded him for months was finally beginning to dissolve. When Marcus and Ethan left the building, the sun was setting over the walls of Westbridge, painting the school in shades of gold and orange. In the parking lot, a woman was discreetly observing. She approached, introducing herself. "I'm a reporter for Channel 7 News. I've been following the case. Would you be willing to talk about what happened today?" Marcus hesitated. Part of him just wanted to go home, to protect his son from the world, but another part knew the silence was what fueled all of this. He took a deep breath. "Yes, but not today. Tomorrow. My son has already been through too much." The reporter nodded, handing him a card. In the car, Ethan looked out the window, at the school, at the sky that was now turning lilac. "Okay, yes, son. Thank you for believing in me. Even when I couldn't tell you everything, you knew, and you showed up." Marcus hugged him, his voice choked with emotion. "I'll always show up, son. Always. That's a promise." Before they started the car, Ethan took something out of his backpack. A crumpled piece of paper, folded several times. "I found this in my closet this morning." Marcus unfolded the paper. The handwriting was shaky, anonymous. "Be strong. You are not alone. Some of us see what is happening and are trying to find the courage to speak up. Don't give up." Marcus stared at the note for a long moment, his heart aching, and then he realized that even in the deepest shadows, courage always finds a voice. Marcus Wright looked at his son, his heart heavy with pride. The strength Ethan needed to muster to go into that school day after day, facing mockery, silences, and scornful stares, was something no adult should demand of a child. "You're saved today too, son," Marcus said softly, "for not giving up, for continuing. I'm so proud of you." As the car drove away from Westbridge Academy, father and son had no idea that the revelations of that day were only the beginning. There were even deeper secrets, falsified documents, and a web of corruption that went far beyond a simple school, one that would soon shock the entire community. But for now, the worst was over. They returned home together with the promise of justice within their reach. The following morning, Marcus woke up before dawn. Despite his exhaustion, his mind gave him no respite. In the living room, the cold light from the kitchen illuminated the cup of coffee that had been cold for hours. The soft sound of Ethan's breathing, still asleep, was the only comfort. The laptop screen flashed with dozens of messages, parents offering support, reporters requesting interviews, and a notification that immediately caught their attention. Office of the District Superintendent of Education. Subject: Urgent Meeting, 9 a.m., Westbridge Academy. Marcus looked at his watch. 7:30. Enough time to let the child sleep a little longer. At 8:45 a.m., their car was crossing the school gates again. But the atmosphere was completely different from the day before. News vans lined the street, cameras spun around, microphones extended. Journalists raced for every second to capture the face of the man who had defied the system. Marcus kept his gaze straight ahead, ignoring the commotion. Inside, the corridors were filled with a silent tension. The doors to the rooms were closed, but it was impossible to hide the discomfort. In the conference room, two people were waiting for them. A woman with a firm expression and piercing eyes stood up first. "Detective Rachel Bennett," he introduced himself, "in charge of the investigation." Beside him, a young, focused man extended his hand. Inspector David Chen, assistant investigator. Marcus greeted them both, keeping his hand on his son's shoulder. "Mr. Wright, Ethan, thank you for coming," Rachel said, her voice calm but deep. "We know yesterday was a difficult day, but what you did brought something much bigger to light." Marcus nodded, his gaze steady. "We just want the truth to come out, the whole truth." The detective opened a sturdy folder filled with papers and screenshots. "We've spent the last 18 hours reviewing videos, security records, and internal school communications." She spread several sheets of paper on the table. These are Ethan's disciplinary reports from the last 4 months. Marcus leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. The documents described 14 warnings, all for false reasons: disrupting the class, aggressive behavior, insubordination. Ethan looked at his father, indignant. But I never did any of that. Most of it never even happened. Inspector David responded with empathy. We know. When we cross-referenced these records with the attendance system and the cameras, we found serious inconsistencies. He pointed to a sheet of paper. Here, for example, there's a warning, dated August 12th, but the cameras show you in the infirmary at that time, Rachel added. There are records of punishments on days when you didn't even come to school, and on other days, photos prove you were in completely different places. The silence in the room was heavy. Marcus clenched his fists. So they fabricated evidence against my son. The detective nodded, her face serious. It seems so. We'll need to hear from many employees, but the manipulation is clear. Rachel looked at Ethan kindly. We'd like to start with you, if you're ready. Marcus looked at his son. Is everything all right with you, champ? I'll stay out here. Ethan took a deep breath and replied, I want to tell you everything. Marcus hugged him briefly before leaving the room. In the hallway he could hear the muffled sounds of questions and the calm yet firm answers of a boy who could finally tell the truth. Other parents started to arrive. Sophie Martinez and her mother Diana were also there. Diana approached. How is he? Strong, Marcus replied. More than it needs to be. 20 minutes later, Rachel called him back. Ethan looked tired but relieved. The detective smiled empathetically. Your son was very cooperative. His testimony is consistent with the videos and contradicts the official reports. Marcus placed his hand on the boy's shoulder. I knew that this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something much bigger. And for the first time in a long time, the truth was on their side. We'll be speaking with other students throughout the day, Detective Rachel Bennett said, closing the folder of statements. We want a complete picture of what's been happening here. Marcus nodded, but his voice was firm. And what about Professor Victoria Ashford and Principal Morrison? Inspector David Chen responded promptly, Both will be heard later today, as will other professors and Dr. Richard Thornton. As they left the room, Marcus and Ethan crossed paths with Sophie Martinez, who was entering accompanied by her mother. She smiled briefly at Ethan, a small gesture but full of meaning. That smile said, You are no longer alone. In the hallway, father and son waited while one student after another was called. Therefore, the pattern became evident. Almost everyone confirmed Ethan's version. The testimonies described the same scenario. A boy isolated, ridiculed, and teachers pretending not to see. Vice Principal Victoria Ashford appeared in virtually every account, blaming Ethan for conflicts he didn't start, encouraging other students to avoid him. Then they called Professor Jennifer Hayes, the same young woman who, weeks earlier, had warned Marcus about the tampered files. When she came in, she seemed tense, almost trembling. Even from outside, Marcus was able to hear fragments of the conversation. In October, I noticed that Ethan was being isolated. I saw students avoiding him, and when I asked why, one of them said that Professor Ashford had said he was troublesome and that they should keep their distance. Sai, what did you do with that information? Rachel asked. I sought out Principal Morrison. I told him I was concerned about the pattern of behavior toward the boy. He told me that Ms. Ashford had everything under control and that I shouldn't get involved. And you insisted? Asked Inspector Chen. Long silence. No, I should have done more, but I didn't. She was intimidating. She had a lot of power at the school. I was afraid of losing my job. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment. I understood that fear, but I also knew the price of silence. Your son will pay for it. The interview that changed everything happened around noon. Dr. Richard Thornton's son Blake arrived accompanied only by his mother. She was visibly shaken, her face rigid, her eyes brimming with anger and shame. Marcus watched from a distance as she practically dragged the boy into the meeting room. The conversation lasted for more than an hour. When they left, Blake looked smaller, paler, and his mother was openly crying. Shortly after, Rachel called Marcus back. "Mr. Wright, please come in." Inside the room, she swiveled the laptop towards her. On the screen, there was a messaging app window. "During the deposition, Blake showed us this," the detective explained. Marcus approached and began to read the conversation. My blood ran cold. Messages dating back months, exchanged between a group of students. Instructions on how to provoke Ethan, encouraging exclusion, mockery, and even racist jokes about his family. But what made Marcus hold his breath were the messages from an adult number. Blake confessed. The number belonged to his father, Dr. Richard Thornton. One of the messages said, "Keep it up. If Wright leaves, you get a bonus." Another one said, "Make sure people see his reaction, not what you do beforehand." Marcus felt his hands clench into fists. He paid his own son to torment mine. Rachel replied in a low voice, "Unfortunately, everything indicates that this is the case. We are investigating the extent of his involvement. What we have here may constitute a criminal conspiracy, child molestation, corruption of minors, and falsification of records." Inspector Chen opened another file. When we examined Professor Ashford's computer, we found a hidden folder marked as restricted access. He displayed the content. Drafts of disciplinary reports, created days, even weeks, before any incident actually occurred. Marcus leaned forward, incredulous. She planned the punishments in advance. Chen confirmed. Yes, he created a false record to make Ethan seem like an aggressive and unruly student. Marcus put his hand to his head, trying to comprehend the absurdity. But why? Why my son? Rachel exchanged a serious look with the inspector before replying, "We found emails exchanged between Professor Ashford and Dr. Thornton." She picked up a printed sheet. The first one is in September, shortly after classes begin. In the body of the email, Thornton wrote, "Some new families are lowering the standard of this school. We need to protect the Westbridge standard." The detective looked up at Marcus. "It seems that it all started there, Mr. Wright. A prejudice disguised as a standard. A power network deciding who deserved to belong in this place and who didn't." Marcus took a deep breath, his eyes welling up with tears, but his voice firm. "Well, now they're going to find out that justice also has a standard, and that standard is truth." Professor Victoria Ashford responded in one of the emails that she would make sure to handle the matter discreetly. Marcus Wright took a deep breath before speaking, his voice choked but firm. "They wanted my son to leave because of the color of his skin. They chose an 11-year-old child as a target because they didn't believe he belonged in such a respectable school. None of the investigators attempted to deny it. The evidence spoke for itself. It was overwhelming." Detective Rachel Bennett slowly closed her laptop and looked at Marcus. "Mr. Wright, what happened to Ethan is unacceptable. Everyone responsible will be held accountable. But I need to ask you one thing. Do you authorize us to expand the research?" Marcus stared at her seriously. "Expand?" "Some emails indicate that this may not have been an isolated case," Rachel explained. "If you'll allow us, we'd like to review the disciplinary records of other students, primarily black students and scholarship recipients, from recent years." Marcus didn't hesitate for a second. Do it. If other children have gone through something similar, their families deserve to know. The hours turned into a long and exhausting day. More interviews, more revelations. The pattern was clear and cruel. Victoria Ashford had been systematically selecting students she considered unsuitable for Westbridge Academy, with the financial and ideological support of Dr. Richard Thornton. She created false reports, distorted incidents, and pressured children until they reacted, only to use their reactions as justification for punishments and expulsions. When Victoria Ashford finally showed up for the interview, she arrived accompanied by a lawyer. The session lasted more than 3 hours. When she left, she was pale, defeated, lacking the arrogance she had displayed in the hallways. The lawyer could barely sustain his own arguments in the face of the mountain of digital evidence. The meeting with Director Robert Morrison was equally destructive. He admitted to ignoring warnings from teachers and parents. He preferred to protect donors and maintain appearances, allowing discrimination to take root as a silent part of the school's culture. His negligence had created fertile ground for abuse to flourish for years. By late afternoon, more than 30 interviews had been conducted. The picture was devastating: institutional failure, systemic bias, and deliberate cruelty against vulnerable students. Rachel found Marcus in the hallway, where he was waiting with their son. The investigator's expression was a mixture of gravity and relief. "We have sufficient evidence to proceed with the formal recommendations," he announced. "Professor Victoria Ashford will be dismissed and may face criminal charges for harassment, falsification of documents, and abuse of authority. Director Morrison's position is being reviewed, and Dr. Richard Thornton will face a criminal investigation for inciting harassment and racial discrimination." Marcus nodded, his heart racing. "And my son? What happens to him now?" Rachel softened her tone. "That depends on you. The school is obligated to guarantee Ethan's safety and psychological support. If you want to transfer him, the process will be facilitated. If you want him to stay, the school will be responsible for ensuring that he never goes through anything like this again." Marcus looked at Ethan, who remained silent. "What do you want, son?" The boy thought for a few seconds. "I want to stay. I don't want them to win. I want to prove that I belong here." Pride filled Marcus's chest. Even though he was injured, the boy kept his head held high. She still believed in her own dignity, and that was worth more than any legal victory. The following day, news of the investigation's findings spread through Westbridge like wildfire. Reporters parked outside, parents whispered at the gates, and the hallways buzzed with hushed conversations. Some teachers walked around with their heads down, ashamed. Others were furious, fearing for their jobs. The school board had called an emergency meeting for that evening, open to all families. Marcus knew the auditorium would be packed, but first he needed to ensure one thing: that his son was all right. As he dropped Ethan off at school, he watched from a distance. Some students looked away, embarrassed. Others, however, surprised him. During recess, 2 girls from art class invited him to participate in a group project. A classmate from science class invited him to sit with him at lunch, and Sophie Martinez, as always, was there, loyal, protective, a friend. Not everyone was ready to accept the new reality. A small group of students, children of influential families, murmured words of discontent in the hallways. But for the first time, Ethan walked with his head held high, and the stares that had once hurt him now looked away in the face of his courage. The system had tried to delete it, but he remained there, living proof that the truth, once revealed, can never be silenced. During lunch, Ethan Wright was trying to focus on his food when he heard whispers behind him. They were tall enough for him to hear every word. "This investigation is destroying the school's reputation. The parents are furious. They're going to withdraw the donations. All this because of that boy." One of the boys, a friend of Blake Thornton's, approached the table and, with a wry smile, said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "I hope you're happy. You destroyed Westbridge." Before Ethan could react, 3 students from nearby tables stood up. One of them replied firmly, "He didn't destroy anything. It was the people who persecuted him who did that." Another added, "Maybe if you stopped acting like an idiot, the school wouldn't need to be investigated." The boy blushed and walked away without saying anything else. But that moment represented something important. The tide was turning. The students were beginning to choose a side, and increasingly, the right side. That evening, the Westbridge Academy auditorium was packed an hour before the meeting began. Parents, students, teachers, and journalists occupied every seat. Marcus Wright arrived with Ethan, finding a place alongside Diana Martinez and her daughter Sophie, who had become staunch allies from day one. The atmosphere was buzzing. Some parents demanded justice. Others focused on controlled damage, more concerned with the school's image and the value of properties in the neighborhood than with the victims. When council member Patricia Crawford took the stage, accompanied by the other council members and Superintendent Catherine Sullivan, the murmuring ceased instantly. "Thank you all for being here," Patricia began. "We know this week has been difficult and that everyone deserves transparency regarding what has been discovered." What followed was a veritable earthquake. Patricia presented the official results of the investigation, the falsified reports, the coordinated harassment campaign, the financial incentives paid by Dr. Richard Thornton to his own son, the ignored complaints, and the pattern of persecution of black students and scholarship recipients that had been repeated for years at the school. With each revelation, the audience reacted with shouts, murmurs, and disbelief. Some parents seemed genuinely horrified. Others, visibly guilty, perhaps realized they had turned a blind eye for convenience. When Patricia finished, the silence was broken by a flurry of questions. A father stood up in the front row. "Why wasn't Dr. Thornton stopped sooner? Everyone knew he influenced the school's decisions." Patricia sighed, visibly tense. "That's a fair question. The truth is, we failed in our oversight. Dr. Thornton's donations created a power dynamic that should never have existed. It was wrong, and the board takes responsibility for it." Another mother stood up. Marcus recognized her from previous fundraising events. "And what about the other students? You said this wasn't limited to Ethan's case. How many children were targeted by this practice?" Superintendent Catherine Sullivan stepped forward. "Our preliminary analysis has identified at least 6 students over the past 3 years who may have been victims of the same type of discrimination. We are contacting all families to offer psychological support and review their school records." The auditorium erupted in protests and exclamations. Some parents exchanged anxious glances, fearing that their children might be among the names mentioned. The scandal was taking on devastating proportions. Then a man in an expensive suit stood up at the back of the room. His face was flushed with indignation. "This is absurd! You are destroying the reputation of this school because of a few misunderstandings and families who simply don't understand the Westbridge culture." A murmur of indignation swept through the auditorium. Before Marcus could answer, a woman stood up and shouted, "If this culture includes racism and persecution of children, then it deserves to be destroyed." The audience erupted in applause. The man, surprised to find himself alone, sat down with a closed expression. It was then that Dr. Richard Thornton stood up at the back of the hall. Silence settled in like a wave. All eyes turned to him. The once proud businessman now seemed dejected, his eyes tired, and his voice choked with emotion. "I want to defend myself against the accusations being made against me," he began, trying to maintain his composure. "The emails and messages quoted were taken out of context. I never instructed my son to hurt anyone. I only wanted to preserve the standards of excellence of this institution." A voice from the audience cut through the air. "Paying your son to torment an 11-year-old child? Is that how you define excellence?" The impact of the phrase was immediate. The murmuring turned to outrage, and Ethan Wright's name echoed as a symbol of truth that no one could ignore anymore. At that moment, the school that had previously rejected him was forced to look in the mirror and to acknowledge what it had truly become. Dr. Richard Thornton attempted to regain control of the narrative by raising his voice. By encouraging my son to uphold the values upon which this school was founded, I simply wanted to preserve excellence. But in saying that, his mask slipped. Anger began to seep out between the words. Westbridge Academy has always been a place for families of a certain standard. When that standard is distorted, everyone suffers. The auditorium erupted in chaos. Parents stood up, voices overlapping, fingers pointed. Some tried to defend Thornton's right to have his opinion, but most openly condemned him. The mask of tradition no longer hid racism and privilege. Marcus Wright remained seated, his arm around Ethan, observing the scene before him. That wasn't just a school meeting. It was a community falling apart over values it had pretended not to see for years. Suddenly, Diana Martinez stood up. His voice cut through the tumult like a blade. Dr. Thornton, my daughter is in the same class as Ethan. She saw what your son and his friends did. What you call standard was, in fact, a cruel campaign of humiliation against a child whose only mistake was existing in a space you consider exclusive. This has nothing to do with excellence. It has to do with intolerance. A spontaneous round of applause echoed through the room, growing into a deafening roar of applause. Thornton's face turned from red to purple, his hands clenched into fists. Before she could react, Superintendent Catherine Sullivan intervened. Dr. Thornton, you are no longer a member of this board, and considering the ongoing investigation, I request that you withdraw from the meeting. You can't do this. My family has supported this school for generations, he shouted, his voice cracking. Councillor Patricia Crawford responded with unwavering firmness, and we are grateful for that. But no amount of money can buy the right to harm children. If necessary, security will escort you to the exit. For a moment, it seemed that he would resist, but when she looked around, all she found were cold stares, crossed arms, and disapproval. With a snap of suppressed anger, he turned and hurried out, while his parents made way, some with disdain, others simply avoiding looking at him. When the door closed behind him, the auditorium let out a collective gasp. Superintendent Catherine Sullivan took the microphone again. The district made important decisions regarding the leadership and policies of Westbridge Academy. The room grew quiet. Effective immediately, Professor Victoria Ashford's contract is terminated. She will face criminal charges for falsifying documents and endangering minors. Applause echoed. Director Robert Morrison has submitted his resignation. A new interim director will be appointed later this week while we search for permanent leadership. More murmurs of approval. Some parents even seemed relieved. Furthermore, Catherine continued, we are implementing a comprehensive structural reform. Mandatory training on implicit bias for all faculty, the creation of an independent student advocate position, a transparent whistleblowing system, and quarterly external reviews of disciplinary records. And for the first time, a parent oversight committee with real power to evaluate and monitor the school's internal practices. The impact was immediate. Parents nodded in agreement. Some were already volunteering for the committee. But not everyone accepted the changes. A small but noisy group remained standing beside the auditorium. A woman covered in jewels, a living symbol of the arrogance that had sustained that system, raised her voice. This is absurd. You're destroying the culture of Westbridge because of a handful of complaints. My husband and I, along with other families, are considering withdrawing our children and our financial support. This school won't survive without us. She looked around, hoping for support. Few accompanied her, a dozen perhaps among hundreds. Superintendent Catherine remained calm. "You are right about one thing. Westbridge's mission has always been to educate citizens, all of them, with respect and excellence. If that is incompatible with your values, perhaps this is not the right school for your family." The woman's face turned red. He grabbed his bag and coat and left with heavy steps. Her small group followed her in awkward silence. When the door closed behind them, someone started to applaud, then another and another. Within seconds, the entire auditorium was applauding. The message was unmistakable. The community had finally chosen the right side of history. When the applause died down, a father stood up in the audience. "I want to hear from Mr. Wright and Ethan. They are at the center of all this. We owe them the right to speak." Silence returned to the room. All eyes turned to Marcus and Ethan Wright. For the first time, father and son were not seen as the target of scandal, but as a symbol of the change the school so desperately needed. Marcus Wright felt his son tense up beside him. That invitation to speak before everyone hadn't been planned. But as he looked around the Westbridge Academy auditorium, he saw something different. Attentive faces, sincere expressions, genuine curiosity. Not hostility. "Do you want to talk, son?" she asked in a low voice. Ethan took a deep breath and nodded. Together, they walked to the front. Marcus helped him onto the small platform, adjusting the microphone to the boy's height. For a moment, Ethan stood motionless, gazing at the sea of parents, teachers, and classmates. Then, in a whisper that grew louder with each word, he began, "I didn't want any of that. I just wanted to study, learn, and have friends." He paused briefly, his breath trembling. "When they started treating me badly, I tried to ignore it. I thought that if I stayed quiet, everything would pass, but it didn't. It got worse. And the adults who should have protected me didn't listen to me. Or they pretended not to see." His voice faltered, but he continued, "I don't want to ruin anyone's school. I just want to be treated like someone who matters, like someone who belongs here. Is that too much to ask?" The silence that followed was absolute. Parents were crying openly. The teachers lowered their eyes. The weight of the boy's simple and honest words hung in the air like a truth impossible to ignore. Marcus stepped forward and placed his hand on his son's shoulder. "My son is the bravest person I know. He survived months of humiliation, lies, and injustice, and yet he still believes this school can be better. He's giving Westbridge a second chance. The question is, will this community live up to the faith he's placed in it?" The applause was deafening. Parents stood up, some crying, others clapping loudly. That moment, brief but powerful, changed the atmosphere of the school. Ethan sat back down, snuggling up next to his father, visibly emotional. Colleagues approached to apologize, offer support, and even professors came to shake Marcus's hand and promise changes. The atmosphere had changed. The complicit silence had been broken. The meeting lasted for more than an hour. Parents volunteered for oversight committees. Teachers presented reform ideas. Students shared their own stories, some painful, others liberating. It was difficult, tense, and deeply necessary. When the meeting ended, Marcus and Ethan walked to the exit, exhausted but relieved. Before they reached the door, Councillor Patricia Crawford called them. His face looked serious. "Mr. Wright, there's something else you need to know." She handed him a brown envelope. "During the investigation, we found references to an old archive room, room 3117. Researchers believe it holds physical disciplinary records that are not in the digital systems. One of them told me, it's not pretty what's inside, but it's important that you see it." Marcus looked at his son, who had heard everything. Ethan simply nodded, tired but firm. "Tomorrow," said the father. "We'll see tomorrow. Today we need to rest." But as they drove through the quiet streets of Lakewood Heights, Marcus couldn't stop thinking about room 317. "I had a feeling that what they had discovered so far was only the beginning. The following morning, Marcus and Ethan returned to Westbridge with a purpose. The school seemed different, less oppressive, lighter, as if some of the darkness had dissipated. In the hallways, some students greeted Ethan respectfully. Others still looked away, but the hostility had disappeared. At the entrance, Detective Rachel Bennett awaited them, her expression tense. "Thank you for coming. Room 317 is on the 3rd floor in the administrative wing. It's not a place students are familiar with. Technically, all records should have been digitized, but we discovered that someone kept physical files hidden. They went up together in silence. The hallway was narrow, silent, and cold. Marcus kept his hand on his son's shoulder, an instinctive gesture of protection. At the end of the corridor, an old unmarked door displayed only the faded sign, 317. Rachel unlocked it. The smell of old paper and dust filled the air. Inside, metal shelves crammed with boxes and yellowed folders. She put on gloves and handed out pairs to the two of them. "We want you to see this in person, to understand the scale of what has been done here." He led them to the back of the room, where he retrieved a box marked with the years 2019-2020. Each folder had a student's name on it. Marcus opened one of them, Tyler Anderson. He read the reports, and his heart tightened. The pattern was the same. Minor warnings turned into alleged serious incidents. Cold notes about aggressive behavior, isolation recommended, monitoring during recess. Everything was directed at a boy who, in previous records, was exemplary, studious, and kind. "What happened to that boy?" Marcus asked, his voice faltering. Rachel sighed. "He was transferred to a public school mid-year. His mother claimed he wasn't fitting in. She said she didn't think Westbridge was the right place for them." Marcus looked at Ethan. They both understood without needing to say anything. That boy, like so many others, never had a chance to fight. And at that moment, father and son realized what they had faced was not just an isolated case of prejudice, but part of a much older and darker structure. The whole truth was still hidden there among those dusty folders, and Marcus Wright was ready to dig it up, no matter the cost. Marcus Wright clenched his teeth. He was expelled in the same way they tried to do with Ethan. Rachel Bennett nodded, pulling out another folder, then another. Each one told the same story with slight variations, different faces, the same cruelty. The first one bore the name Natalia Santos, a girl accused of theft, even though the cameras showed that, at the time of the incident, she was in the classroom. The second folder belonged to Kevin Liu, a quiet and studious boy who was labeled aggressive after reacting to teasing from classmates. The third era was that of Amara Johnson, a brilliant student with recognized artistic talent, but who was labeled an exhibitionist for expressing her creativity in school murals. They all had something in common. They were students from minority backgrounds. They were all isolated, punished, and ultimately expelled from Westbridge Academy. Ethan stared at the files with growing horror. "This happened to all of them for years," Rachel confirmed with a serious nod. "At least 6 cases have been documented so far, and these are just the ones that Professor Victoria Ashford kept on file. It's likely that others exist whose records have been destroyed." Marcus felt his stomach clench. Anger and sadness mingled. They were children, families who believed in this school, people who entrusted their children's future to this place and were betrayed. Families need to know. "They will know," Rachel replied. "We are already trying to locate them. Some have moved, others may not want to relive this, but they all deserve the truth." Marcus carefully placed the folder on the table. "And now, what happens to all of this? The teacher was fired, but that doesn't erase what she did. These children lost years of their lives, their trust, their peace." Rachel looked at him intently. "The district will offer comprehensive support, psychological, legal, and academic. All falsified records will be reviewed and corrected. We are also creating a reconciliation program so that former students can tell their stories if they wish." Marcus shook his head. It was a start, but he knew that no amount of repairing the damage would be enough. Nothing could bring back what those children had lost. For over an hour, they remained in room 317, documenting every piece of evidence. Each folder was a portrait of injustice, each signature an institutional scar. When they left, Marcus was exhausted. Ethan, pale, could barely speak. But before they left, Rachel approached and said in a low voice, "There will be a press conference this afternoon. The district will release the results of the investigation and the reparations measures. They would like you to speak, you and your son." Marcus looked at Ethan, who was observing an old bulletin board on the wall, covered in yellowed notices and photos of old classes. "I will speak," he replied, "but I want to make it clear that this isn't about Ethan. It's about all the children who have been persecuted, all the families who have been silenced. They deserve to be heard." Rachel nodded with a slight tired smile. "And they deserve it, Mr. Wright. I want you to know that it was your courage to fight for your son that brought all of this to light. Without you, these files could have remained hidden for years." Marcus took a deep breath. It wasn't courage, it was being a father. Any father would do the same. Rachel stared at him, her gaze a mixture of respect and sadness. Many saw the signs and became convinced it was an exaggeration. Others believed the lies they told about their children. You trusted your instincts and your boy. That makes all the difference. Hours later, the Westbridge Academy library had been transformed into an impromptu press room. Cameras lined up, reporters squeezing together, microphones pointed at the central podium. Superintendent Catherine Sullivan was the first to speak. His voice, firm and clear, echoed between the silent shelves. "We are not here to protect the school's image, but to restore the truth. Westbridge Academy has failed. For years, a system of discrimination and manipulation has operated within its walls, and today we are here to dismantle it." She presented the findings of the investigation and the reforms that have already begun. There were no euphemisms, there were no excuses. Then Marcus Wright stepped onto the podium, Ethan by his side. The boy, dressed in a simple suit and with a serene look, held his father's hand tightly. The camera lights flickered, the murmuring ceased, and in that moment, before the press and the nation, Marcus and Ethan became the voice of hundreds of forgotten students. The truth they had revealed, born of pain, now echoed as a call for justice. The silence in the library was absolute when Marcus Wright began to speak. He had no notes. There was no teleprompter, no rehearsed lines. There was only one father, a tired but determined man, speaking on behalf of dozens of families who had been silenced for years. "When I found out what they did to my son, I thought the world had collapsed. But what I saw afterward made me realize that the world had already collapsed a long time ago. It's just that many people pretended not to see the rubble." Marcus's voice echoed through the hall, firm and full of emotion. Some reporters let their cameras shake, not out of distraction, but because their own hands were trembling. What happened to Ethan, to Natalia, to Kevin, to Amara, to Tyler, and to so many others isn't just about prejudice. It's about power, about adults who chose to maintain privileges, even if it cost the innocence of children. It's about an institution that taught excellence, but practiced exclusion, and about silence, the silence of those who saw, heard, and yet remained silent. Marcus took a deep breath and continued, "I'm not here to destroy Westbridge. I'm here because I believe there's still something to rebuild, that this school, this community, this country can still learn what justice is. Because justice isn't revenge. It's memory, it's reparation, it's the courage to change what's wrong, even if it hurts." He looked at Ethan, who was watching him with teary eyes. "My son taught me something no college could, That courage isn't about shouting louder. Courage is about continuing to believe, even when the world tries to silence you. He believed, and that's why we're here today. For a moment, nobody breathed. Then a clap began, timid, isolated, and grew, transforming into a wave of applause, shouts, and tears. Parents stood up, teachers wept, journalists lowered their cameras to give a standing ovation. That wasn't just the end of an investigation. It was the beginning of something new. In the days that followed, the headlines spread across the country. Elite school accused of systematic discrimination. Secret files reveal years of persecution of minority students. Social media was flooded with messages of support, testimonials from former students, apologies and promises of change. But for Marcus and Ethan, the real transformation wasn't on camera or in the newspapers. It was in the small gestures of everyday life. The morning after the press conference, when they arrived at Westbridge, a group of students was waiting for them at the gate. Among them, Sophie Martinez, Ethan's loyal friend, held a sign that read, in blue and red letters, "Everyone belongs." Other students approached, offering hugs, apologizing, promising to do things differently. The school seemed completely different. The air, once thick and cold, now seemed to breathe hope. Superintendent Catherine Sullivan kept her promise. The reforms began immediately. New protocols, independent commissions, mandatory training, and, for the first time, an annual week dedicated to school justice and equality. The name Ethan Wright had become a symbol of resilience. One afternoon, weeks later, Marcus returned to room 317. The space was now clean, bright, free of dust and the smell of neglect. Boxes had been replaced with new shelves, organized and catalogued. A discreet sign, affixed to the door, read, "Memory and Reparation Archive. May the truth never be hidden again." He walked over to one of the tables and opened one of the original folders, Natalia Santos's. Inside, there was now a new sheet of paper, handwritten by herself, attached with a paperclip. It took a while, but the truth prevailed. "Today I am a teacher, and I teach my students that knowledge liberates, but empathy saves." Marcus smiled, his eyes welling up with tears. The past, at last, was beginning to be repaired. At the end-of-year graduation ceremony, Westbridge Academy was filled once again, but this time with genuine joy. On stage, Ethan received a special award created in his honor, the Hope and Truth Medal. While the audience applauded him, he searched for his father in the crowd and smiled. Marcus applauded back, but couldn't hold back his tears. He knew that the boy, once humiliated and silenced, was now being heard, respected, and celebrated. And that somehow all the voices that had been silenced, those of Natalia, Kevin, Amara, Tyler, echoed through him. After the ceremony, as they walked through the illuminated garden, Ethan whispered, "Dad, do you think it's over?" Marcus looked at his son and replied, "It doesn't end. Stories like this never truly end. They just change shape." Today, our story has become one of courage. Tomorrow, it can become one of hope. But what matters is that this time, no one will be able to erase what we've built. The boy smiled, resting his head on his father's shoulder. The two stood there for a few moments, watching the wind stir the school flags. The same school that had once wounded them was now beginning to heal other wounds. And when they left Westbridge, the sun was beginning to rise over Lakewood Heights, painting the sky in warm, golden hues. Marcus took a deep breath, feeling for the first time in months that he could finally rest. Justice could not erase the past, but he had given back the future. And at that moment, he knew that Ethan was no longer just the boy who survived. He was the living symbol of a country that was slowly learning to wake up. Before we wrap up, I'd like to invite you to leave a comment letting us know where you're watching this story from. Your participation is very important to us. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the upcoming stories.